My name is Evelyn, and I am 32 years old living in the quiet suburbs of Springfield in the United States of America. I have always been the kind of person who finds peace in nature rather than people, and my little house on the corner of Maple Street was my absolute sanctuary. When I first bought the place 5 years ago, it was a complete disaster area, but I did not mind because I saw the potential in the land. The house is a small cottage built in the 1920s, but the real treasure was the backyard. Standing tall and proud in the very center of my yard was a massive white oak tree that the local historians told me was at least 200 years old. I named the tree Barnaby because he felt like a member of the family rather than just a plant. Barnaby was huge with branches that spread out like giant protective arms over my entire property. In the summer, he provided so much shade that I never even had to turn on my air conditioning, which saved me a lot of money. In the autumn, his leaves turned a deep and beautiful shade of crimson and gold that made my heart ache with joy. I spent every weekend working in my garden planting hydrangeas and ferns that loved the dappled sunlight Barnaby provided. I was happy and content in my little world until the house next door was sold to a man named Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was a retired city administrator who seemed to believe that the entire world should be paved over and painted gray. He moved in during the middle of July, and within 1 week, he had already complained to me about the leaves. He told me that Barnaby was a nuisance and that the leaves would eventually fall into his pool, which he had not even built yet. I tried to be a good neighbor, so I told him I would be happy to rake up any leaves that blew over the fence, but that did not satisfy him. He wanted the tree gone. He said it was a safety hazard and that a big storm would knock it over onto his house. I had a certified arborist come out and check the tree, and the professional told me that Barnaby was the healthiest oak tree he had seen in 20 years. I showed the report to Mr. Henderson, but he just scoffed and called it a piece of junk paper. From that day on, Mr. Henderson made it his mission in life to make me miserable. He started calling the city code enforcement office every single week. He complained about the height of my grass, even though I mowed it every Saturday. He complained about the color of my front door, which was a cheerful yellow, and he even complained about the sound of my wind chimes. Each time the city officers came out, they would look at my yard and sigh because they knew Mr. Henderson was just being a bully, but they had to follow up on the reports anyway. It was exhausting, and I felt like I was constantly under attack in the one place where I should have felt safe. The situation got much worse when winter came. Mr. Henderson decided that he was going to build a massive shed right against our shared property line. The problem was that Barnaby's roots extended underground near that area. I told him he could not dig there because it would hurt the tree, but he ignored me. He hired a construction crew to start digging, and I had to call my lawyer to get a temporary restraining order just to keep them away from the root zone. That was the moment when the war truly began. Mr. Henderson was furious that a 32-year-old woman had stopped his plans. He started screaming at me over the fence, calling me names, and saying that I was holding back the progress of the neighborhood. I stayed calm, but inside I was shaking. A few weeks later, I had to go away for a business trip to Chicago for 4 days. I was nervous about leaving the house, but I asked my friend Sarah to keep an eye on things. On the third day of my trip, I got a frantic phone call from Sarah. She was crying and told me that there was a massive truck in my driveway and men with chainsaws were in the backyard. I felt like the air had been kicked out of my lungs. I told her to call the police immediately, and I caught the very next flight back to Springfield. By the time I got home, the damage was done. My beautiful Barnaby was gone. All that was left was a jagged stump and a yard full of sawdust and broken branches. They had also crushed my prize-winning hydrangeas and destroyed my vintage stone bird bath. I stood in the middle of my yard and sobbed. It felt like a death in the family. I looked over the fence and saw Mr. Henderson standing on his back porch with a smug grin on his face. He actually had the nerve to wave at me and say that he had done me a favor by getting rid of that old rotten wood. I found out later that he had lied to a local tree removal company, telling them that he owned both properties and that he wanted the tree removed because it was dying. He had even forged my signature on a fake permission slip. I went to the police, but they told me it was a civil matter because the tree company had a signed contract even if it was fraudulent. They said I would have to sue him in court. I felt completely defeated. I had no money for a long legal battle, and Mr. Henderson had been a city official for 30 years, so he knew everyone at the courthouse. He had friends in high places, and I was just a woman who liked plants. I tried to file a lawsuit on my own, but the paperwork was confusing, and the judge assigned to the case was an old golf buddy of Mr. Henderson. At our first hearing, the judge basically laughed at me and said that it was just a tree and that I should move on with my life. He dismissed my claim for damages, saying I had not proven the value of the tree. I went home and sat on the stump of Barnaby and felt like my life was over. Mr. Henderson started his construction on the shed the very next day, and he would whistle loudly while he worked just to mock me. He even threw some of the leftover sawdust over the fence into my yard. I was at my lowest point. I had lost my privacy, my shade, and my peace of mind. But then I remembered something the arborist had said when he first inspected the tree. He had mentioned that Barnaby was a rare subspecies of white oak, and that because of his age and size, he was protected by a very specific set of state laws regarding heritage trees. I spent the next 3 weeks in the public library and looking through online legal databases. I did not just look at tree laws, I looked at every single city ordinance that Mr. Henderson had helped write during his time at the City Hall. I discovered that Springfield has a very strict policy about the removal of heritage trees, which are defined as any tree over 100 years old or with a trunk diameter of more than 36 inches. The law stated that anyone who illegally removed a heritage tree was liable for triple the timber value of the tree plus the cost of replacement and restoration. I also found out that the city required a special permit for any tree removal, and since Mr. Henderson had lied, he had never obtained that permit. But the biggest discovery came when I looked into the zoning laws for Mr. Henderson's new shed. Because he had been so arrogant, he had built the shed without a proper survey. I hired a professional surveyor to come out and mark the exact property line. It turned out that Mr. Henderson had built his shed 3 feet onto my property. He had also failed to get a foundation permit for the shed, which was required for any structure over a certain size. I started putting my plan together. I did not go back to the local judge who was his friend. Instead, I contacted the State Forestry Department and the State Attorney General's office. I presented them with the arborist report from before the tree was cut down, which proved the tree was healthy and met the criteria for a heritage tree. I also showed them the photos of the destruction and the forged signature that Mr. Henderson had used to trick the tree company. The state officials were much more professional than the local ones, and they were very interested in the case because the state had recently passed a new Environmental Protection Act. While the state was investigating, I sent a formal letter to Mr. Henderson via a high-end law firm that specialized in real estate law. I used every penny of my savings to put them on retainer. The letter informed him that his shed was trespassing on my property and that he had 48 hours to remove it, or I would have it demolished at his expense. When Mr. Henderson got the letter, he came running to my front door screaming and red in the face. He told me I was a little girl who didn't know who she was messing with. I didn't say a word. I just pointed to the doorbell camera that was recording everything he said. He realized he was being filmed and stomped away, but he did not move the shed. He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. The State Forestry Department sent an official appraiser to my house. The appraiser was an expert in what is called the trunk formula method of tree valuation. He looked at the size, species, and location of the tree. Because Barnaby provided so much cooling for the house and was a central feature of the landscape, his value was calculated to be $95,000. Since the law allowed for triple damages for the illegal removal of a heritage tree, the total claim against Mr. Henderson was $285,000. That did not even include the cost of the destroyed garden or the stone bird bath. A few days later, the city building inspector showed up at Mr. Henderson's door. I had sent the inspector a copy of the new survey and a formal complaint about the lack of permits for the shed. The inspector was not one of Mr. Henderson's old friends because the department had recently been restructured after a corruption scandal. The inspector told Mr. Henderson that not only was the shed on my property, but it was also structurally unsound because it didn't have a proper foundation. He issued a stop work order and a fine of $500 per day until the structure was removed. Mr. Henderson tried to argue, but the inspector didn't care. The walls were closing in on him. The real climax happened in a state court 3 months later. Mr. Henderson had to hire an expensive lawyer, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. We had the arborist report the photos, the forged signature, and the testimony from the tree removal company owner, who was furious that he had been tricked into doing something illegal. The owner of the tree company testified that Mr. Henderson had told him the tree was a danger to the public and that the city had ordered its removal. When my lawyer showed the court the forged signature, Mr. Henderson's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. The judge was a stern woman who had no patience for people who thought they were above the law. She listened to all the evidence, and then she looked at Mr. Henderson and asked him why he thought he had the right to destroy someone else's property. He tried to give a speech about how the tree was a nuisance, but she cut him off. She ruled in my favor on every single point. She awarded me the full $285,000 for the tree plus $50,000 in punitive damages for his malicious behavior and $20,000 to cover my legal fees. She also ordered him to pay for the professional removal of the shed and the restoration of my garden. Mr. Henderson was stunned. He turned white as a sheet. He didn't have that kind of money sitting in a bank account. He had a nice house, but most of his wealth was tied up in the property. To pay the judgment, he was forced to take out a massive loan that he couldn't afford, and eventually he had to put his house up for sale. He was ruined. The man who wanted to control the neighborhood was now being forced out of it by the very person he tried to bully. But I wasn't finished yet. During the process of the lawsuit, I had learned that the vacant lot on the other side of my house was also owned by a holding company that Mr. Henderson had a stake in. As part of the settlement, I negotiated to take ownership of that lot in exchange for a small reduction in the cash payment. Now I didn't just have my original yard, I had twice as much land. The day Mr. Henderson moved out was the most peaceful day of my life. I watched from my porch as the moving trucks took away his furniture. He didn't look at me once. He looked old and defeated. After he was gone, I used the settlement money to hire a world-class landscape architect. We didn't just plant one tree. We planted 5 large white oaks that were already 20 feet tall. They weren't as big as Barnaby, but they were a start. We also put in a massive rain garden and a privacy hedge that was 10 feet tall made of thick evergreens. My property became a lush green fortress. The resolution of the story is that my yard is now the most beautiful place in all of Springfield. People walk by and stop to take pictures of the flowers and the birds that have returned to the trees. I feel a sense of peace that I never thought I would find again. I have changed too. I am no longer the quiet woman who is afraid to speak up. I learned that I have the strength to fight back and that the law can be a powerful tool if you have the patience to use it correctly. But there was one final twist that I didn't see coming. About 6 months after Mr. Henderson moved away, I received a package in the mail. It was a small wooden box made from the wood of a white oak tree. Inside was a letter from the owner of the tree removal company. He told me that he had felt so guilty about what happened that he had saved a large piece of Barnaby's trunk before it went to the wood chipper. He had hired a master woodworker to create a beautiful hand-carved chest for me. He also included a bag of acorns that he had collected from the branches that day. He said he had kept them in a cool, dry place and hoped they might still grow. I took those acorns and planted them in small pots on my windowsill. Against all odds, 3 of them sprouted. I now have 3 little baby Barnabys growing in my house. One day, they will be as big and strong as their father, and they will stand as a reminder that no matter how much someone tries to destroy something beautiful, life will always find a way to return and grow even stronger. I still live in my cottage on Maple Street, and every time I look out my window at the new trees and the flourishing garden, I am reminded of my victory. Mr. Henderson is gone, and his name is barely remembered in the neighborhood, but Barnaby's legacy lives on in the soil and in the spirit of the woman who refused to let a bully win. My life is full of color and sound, and the shade of my new trees is just as cool as the shade I remember from years ago. I am Evelyn, and I am the woman who saved her home by standing up for a tree. It took a long time and a lot of tears, but in the end, justice was served in the most poetic way possible. I have my land, I have my peace, and I have the future growing in small green pots on my sunny windowsill. The sound of the wind in the leaves is the only music I need, and the knowledge that I protected my sanctuary is the greatest reward I could ever ask for. This experience taught me that being kind and being a pushover are 2 very different things. I will always be kind to my neighbors, but I will never again allow someone to think they can walk all over me or the things I love. The story of Barnaby and Mr. Henderson is told often in our town now as a warning to those who think their influence, and their past titles give them the right to ignore the rights of others. Every time I see a new family move into the neighborhood, I make sure to welcome them with a jar of honey from my garden and a gentle reminder that the trees here are older than all of us and deserve our respect. My sanctuary is safe, and as the sun sets over the Springfield skyline, I can finally sit on my porch and breathe easy knowing that I am exactly where I am supposed to be. The memory of the jagged stump is fading, replaced by the sight of new green leaves reaching for the sky. I have turned a tragedy into a forest, and that is the best kind of revenge I could ever imagine. I have even started a local group dedicated to protecting heritage trees in our city so that no one else has to go through the heartbreak that I did. We have already saved 4 ancient maples and a historic grove of elms from being cut down for a new shopping center. My voice is now heard in the city hall, where Mr. Henderson once reigned, and they listen to me because they know I am not afraid to fight for what is right. My life is bigger and more meaningful than it ever was before the chainsaws came. I lost a friend in Barnaby, but I found my purpose and my strength. And as those 3 little acorns continue to grow, I know that the cycle of life is far more powerful than any man with a grudge and a chainsaw could ever hope to be. The United States of America is full of stories like mine, but I am proud to say that in this corner of Springfield the trees are winning, and they have me to thank for that. Every morning I walk out into the grass and feel the cool earth under my feet, and I look up at the sky through the branches of my new oaks, and I smile, because I know that I am home and I am safe, and I am finally at peace. The birds sing louder now, and the squirrels run across the roof of my cottage, and everything is exactly as it should be. The colors of the sunset reflect off my yellow door, and the wind chimes sing in the breeze, and I am grateful for every single moment of it. My name is Evelyn, and this is the story of how I lost a tree and found my soul, and how I made sure the man who tried to break me was the one who ended up broken. It is a story of growth and grit, and the enduring power of nature to heal and reclaim what was lost. I hope that anyone who hears this will remember that they have the power to change their situation, and that justice is worth fighting for no matter how long it takes or how hard the path may be. Keep growing and keep fighting, and never let the bullies of the world take away your shade. The world needs more trees, and it needs more people who are willing to protect them at any cost. That is the lesson of Barnaby, and it is the lesson of my life. Now I spend my evenings reading on the porch and watching the shadows grow long across the lawn, and I am happy. I am truly happy. The legacy of the white oak is in good hands, and the future is as bright as the morning sun hitting the dew on the leaves of my new forest. I have everything I need, and more than I ever expected to have, and for that I am truly thankful every single day. The end of my story is just the beginning of a new chapter where the trees are tall, and the people are kind, and the bullies are a distant memory of a battle won long ago. This is my life, and it is beautiful.